Our scripture today comes from Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door, outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest in heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. The next reading is from chapter 14, verse 3 through 9. While he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar, a very costly ointment of nard. And she broke open the jar and poured the ointment on his head. But some were there who said to one another in anger, "Why was the ointment wasted in this way? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a good service for me. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly, I tell you, whenever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done be told in remembrance of her."
Will you join me in a moment of prayer? Gracious, holy, loving God, may our words and our thoughts and our reflections be a blessing to you this day and always. Amen. It began with a parade. Up until this point, Jesus wasn't really making a big deal out of himself. Most of his healings were done in secret, where Jesus would tell them not to say anything. And of course, they didn't listen. But in the Jesus we meet here in chapter 11, who sends his disciples to get a donkey and parades into the temple and then turns around and leaves, seems to have a bit of a flair for the dramatic. He will go on later, the next day, to enter the temple, overturn tables, and spend days preaching. But maybe it wasn't a parade as much as a protest march. Those who had gathered for this march into the city had found their way to Jesus and were drawn to him. The disciples had seen him as a rabbi, and they had left their lives and livelihoods behind. And there were all these women that we don't really talk about, but I swear they were there, who were given a place among Jesus' disciples and teachings. There's Bartimaeus, because he had just been healed by Jesus in Jericho, and he couldn't imagine a future without Jesus. And I wonder if right there was Jairus and his daughter. And for them, Jesus was the giver of life. And the woman who had been hemorrhaging for years. Maybe she was there with her family because Jesus had given her back her community. I'm sure there must have been those there who had seen his healing, who believed him to be their new king, who were certain he would overthrow the empire. And in wonder and celebration, in hope and expectation, in joy and revolution, in gratitude and devotion, they traveled with Jesus from their homes in the country, bringing with them whatever they had. And as what often happens when you're in a crowd, you do things you wouldn't normally do, like lay down the coat you're wearing, perhaps the only one you own, onto the street, or the first bit of growth of spring that you brought with you. And it marked the sacredness of the moment. And it was ushering in a new world that Jesus was offering them. Hope and expectation and joy, they called out, "Save us." And they gave all that they had with them to the one they were certain would be able to save them. They weren't just walking to Jerusalem. They were protest marching. A protest against the powers of oppression and violence and death. They were marching for life and liberation and hope. They were willing to give of themselves, to risk their cloaks, their upsetness of whoever does the laundry when they get home. They were willing to risk their well-being and their safety for the protest march. It was probably a bit unsettling that when they reached the temple, Jesus looked around and was like, "That was enough," and just left. Like, what did we march for? Is there a rally? Is there a thing? Nothing. Just go back. There was so much drama and buildup, and the expectations needed to be shifted a little. A few days later, when Jesus gathered with his friends for what would be their last meal together, a woman approached him. In Mark's telling of the story, she doesn't have a name, but she does have a flair for the drama. She seems to be like, I imagine, she snuck up behind Jesus while they were reclining at table for supper and just poured the oil on his head. What the disciples said makes a lot of sense to me. She poured out a year's worth of wages and let it soak up into the ground. There are hungry people in the world. Finish your vegetables. But Jesus celebrates her and tells us to remember her. She took the thing that was of most value, that which was of most importance, and her whole life, and she poured it out in service and in love of Jesus. She gave the very best she had to offer in generous devotion and extravagant love. What brings you out to risk the best coat, or your comfort, or your certainty? What do you love? And what do you bring and pour out for that which you love the most? How do you think about your relationship with Jesus? What would draw you to follow Jesus into a protest march into Jerusalem? What would you bring to the table in an act of reckless love? Now, in the United Church of Christ, we tend to be an intellectually leaning group of people. Our clergy tend to be educated. Our population supports continuing education and advocates for continuing to read. We are committed to our learning. Our Bible studies involve conversations about what was likely to have actually happened in history and what might have been metaphor or parable, what the author was trying to say. What we don't talk about as often is why we keep coming back. Because I think it's likely that the reason someone keeps coming back to church is not because of a study, the academic study of the historical Jesus, because it's not nearly as compelling. There must be something that draws your heart here. Like, why do we baptize? Why baptize Olivia? And I hope it's not that she learns a bunch of facts or simply so she'll be a nice person someday. The late Rachel Held Evans wrote in her final work, The Wholehearted Faith, that there is something about Christianity, and by that I mean the venerable, beautiful story that has Jesus at the center I just can't shake. I have been one who at some point in my life thought about Christianity as an emotional thing, something that requires an emotive response. And then I met Jesus in the academic world of theology books and seminary lectures and really smart sounding conversations. But there is something about the story of God and the life of Jesus and the deep web of connectedness and the stories of God that run through me and call me. So with Rachel, who said, I want to believe in the God who moves mountains. I want to believe in the God who stills the seas. I want to believe in the God who promises to transform hearts of stone into hearts of flesh. And I want to believe that the desires of my heart count for something. It's my hope that the desires of your heart count for something, that these stories move through you and will move through Olivia, that she and you and we, that we may know in the darkest night that when we are wrestling with the powers that seem beyond us, that it will end and we can demand a blessing from the change it has made in us. To find joy and laughter in the journey, to realize God will show up in unexpected places and times. That there's time for reconciliation and restoration and comfort and return. That we are called to love God and the earth and each other and ourselves. To find our place in the world. I long that through you, you believe there is resurrection. There is always new life, and that life and love will always grow again. And that, Olivia, and that all of you, to know that you have a place in God's world and a place in the story God is writing. Rachel Held Evans, I talked to her like she's my friend. I never met her. Anyway, once said, I am a Christian because the story of Jesus is still the story I am willing to risk being wrong about. Because it is a good story. It is a good story on days when I fully believe and am bought in, and on days when all I have is doubt. And it is a good story on days when it only comes to me as whispers and when it blows through like a storm. And it is a good story when it is all intellectual and smart-sounding conversations and when it is only feelings stirring in me. And when it is those feelings that lead me, when it is that compels me to move forward, I could get caught up in the crowd screaming for salvation and liberation and restoration for myself and the world. When that is what leads me, I could pour out my life and my tears. I think I could give up everything to just live in that feeling, and it terrifies me. And so there's always just a little bit that I hold back, that I intellectualize everything. I wonder what you hold back a little. Of your thoughts, of your feelings, of your gifts, of your life, do you hold back just a little bit from your love of God, your love of the world, your love of each other, your love of yourself? What draws you and gives you courage to pour out your love? And what do you hold back to on? And what do you hold on to? And what do you hold back? Friends, I invite you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. Take a couple of deep breaths. Hear in your body the story of Jesus, of God incarnate, who came to you and to love and to teach us how to live. Hear that you are loved and you are called and you belong. Maybe you feel your heart being tugged, drawn closer into relationship with Christ, with the world, with your neighbor, with yourself. Maybe you feel your spirit being drawn into the current of love that moves from the Creator through all of creation. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. The marchers and the woman remain unnamed. People make a lot of assumptions about who she was. Jesus told the disciples that there is a time to care for those without and those in need, and that there is always time for that. But there is also a time for the heart to be poured out in love. So when those who gather to oppose injustice come together, and when one pours out extravagant love, even when or especially when they look foolish, there is a time for that too. Nothing is wasted. Not the cloak, not the oil, not your life. Never love. Nothing is wasted when it's given in love. So what are you called to stand up for, to walk for, to pour out in love? Friends, let us together remember the woman with the alabaster jar together. We remember the woman with the alabaster jar, just as Jesus said we would.